Today we're going to talk about focus stacking, why you might need to focus stack, and how to do it. So why would you want to focus stack? Well, we've talked about aperture in the past and how it influences depth of field, being what you have in focus in the image, what's from the foreground to the background. And while aperture is pretty powerful and you can get some pretty deep depths of field, there are situations where aperture alone by itself won't cut it. For example, when you're using like a wide angle lens and you've got something very close to your lens in the foreground, like a rock, a cactus, a flower, but you also care about that background in focus. Maybe there's some mountains, or maybe there's a cool tree or tree line in the background, or a cave wall or something like that. So in those situations, it's near impossible to get the depth of field you need to keep everything in focus from front to back. And that's where focus stacking comes in. With focus stacking, what you do is you take multiple images with different focus points that you'll blend later. So for example, if you have a rock in the foreground close to the lens, you'd put your focus point on it, get your focus, take the image. Then you'd move on to a little bit deeper into the image, move your focus point to that, maybe the back of the rock or the next rock in the frame. Move your focus point there, get your focus, take the image. Now you've got two images with stacking depths of field, so you're keeping things in focus. Move the focus point to the midground. Maybe there's another rock or another, some subject further off in the distance. Get your focus on that, take another image. And then finally start moving towards the background, maybe the tree leaves, the mountain, put your focus point on that, get focus, take the image. So you end up with 4, 5, 6 images that have varying degrees of depth of field, and that helps give you focus from the front of the image all the way to the back of the image. Then, once you've captured those in camera, you take those images home and you pull them into something like Photoshop or a third-party program, and you can blend those 5 or 6 images together so that all the parts that are in focus are what make up the final image, giving you sharp focus from front to back. So to demonstrate focus stacking, we're heading down to this small creek. It's got rocks poking up out of the water, so we'll have some foreground, midground, and background elements that we'll use focus stacking in order to be sure we have the whole image in focus. And while we're down at the creek, we'll get set up, and I'll sort of walk you through the back of the camera, what we're doing, what we're focusing on, so that we can capture those images that we need to stack later, back when we post-process in either Photoshop or a third-party program. Okay, so we made it down to the creek. As you can see, there's these rocks. We're going to sort of shoot upstream, up this way. So we're going to have rocks here in the foreground, these bigger rocks, some rocks in the midground, and of course the trees in the background. So in order to get this image in focus from front to back, aperture won't do it. We're going to shoot a wide angle lens, and we're going to pop down here in the creek, and we'll see how that looks. Like I said, get you all set up here so you can watch me set up. Then we'll get you in, and we'll sort of show you where I'm focusing as we work through, and we'll capture those images, and then we'll get these images home, stack them in Photoshop, and you'll see that focus stacking isn't that bad, and it's a handy trick for when you got certain scenes like this. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to just get set up right in about here. I've got a rock here, some rocks here, some midground, and some trees in the distance. So we're going to get the tripod set up in here, nice, stable on the creek bottom. I'm shooting wide angle, a 14 to 30, and I do have a polarizing filter on here just to help cut some of the glare off the water. Get that polarizing filter adjusted. Find my composition. So what I am trying to do is I've got big boulder here. These are super close to the camera lens, so to focus in on them with my depth of field, almost regardless of what aperture I'm at, I'm going to start to lose that stuff in the distance. Likewise, if I focus on something out in the distance, I'm going to lose that focus that way. So to solve that is I focus stack, and what that means is I'm going to set my focus point on a rock close to me. I'm going to set one over on this rock over here. The rocks in the midground, one's in the further midground, then I'll set my focus point off in those trees. So I'll end up with about 5 images to focus stack. It's a pretty deep scene, and we're going to capture those in the camera, 5 of them, and then what we'll do is we'll take those and pull them into Photoshop, and we'll get back home, blend them together so that the sharp parts of the image are what make it into the final image. And then I've got focus from front to back. Okay, so what we have here is, this is my scene, and I've got my rocks sitting here, and I've got this boulder off to the right, which is really close to the camera lens. I'm shooting at about 24 millimeters right now. I've got a rock off to the left, still pretty close to the camera. Some strong rocks towards the front of the midground. Smaller rocks further up the creek, further into the midground, and of course the tree leaves in the back. So what we're going to do is we're going to work through the focus here, show you what I'm doing. I believe this is going to take about 5 shots to do. We're going to capture the first one. We're going to focus on this rock that's right here. So put my focus point on it, back button focus, take the image using exposure delay of 2 seconds. I'm going to move my focus point over to this rock over here. So we move my focus point. Okay, I got my focus point on that rock. This is my second image. We're going to capture that. Then I'm going to move up into these rocks in what I would say the front of the midground. So we're going to move the focus point up onto that big rock. Get it on there. Back button focus. Capture the image. Now I'm going to move into these smaller rocks that are deeper into still what I'd say the midground, drifting towards the background. So we're going to move the focus point over there. Back button focus. This is my fourth image. Perfect. Got that. Now I'm going to move into these trees back here, which are the furthest thing off in the frame. Back button focus. Capture that image. And then just to sort of show, I should have put my hand in front. I like to put my hand in front of the lens of the camera, sort of mark it. I forgot to do that on the front, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and just take a picture of my hand in front of the lens. Now when I get these in, I'll see that, and I'll know to count back 5 images to grab my focus stack from this series. So yeah, that's it. These are the 5 images we'll take, put them in Photoshop, blend them together, and see how we did at getting this whole scene in focus from front to back, something that would be difficult to do even if you're running an Aperture f/22 just because of how deep the scene is and how close my foreground elements are. Okay, so we're back in the office and I've pulled the images off the camera and I've pulled them in the Lightroom, and I've chosen the 5 that we're going to work with to demonstrate focus stacking and how to blend them in Photoshop. So let's jump in here to the screen. First, I just want to show you, in case the back of the camera was a little unclear while I was out in the field, where my focus points had been. So I'm going to show that to you on this first image. My first focus point was on this big rock here to the right. And then I moved my focus point over here to this rock slightly further into the foreground, but when it's super close like that, your depth of field can be sort of shallow. So I want to make sure I got that in focus. I moved it out to these rocks that were what I would call the front of the midground. Then I moved it into these rocks in the stream over here, and finally up into the trees. And those 5 shots composed my focus stacking, the images I'm going to use for focus stacking for this example. I feel like it should get me in focus from front to the back. Now, the other thing I want to show you too is, let's just zoom in real quick here and let's take a look at this rock. This was the first shot I took. This is where my focus point was. And as we can see, it's nice and crisp and in focus. In this same image, if we jump back here to the trees, we can see they're out of focus. They're definitely not crisp, definitely not clean, and that's definitely more than any kind of just wind. They're just simply out of focus. So that's what we're talking about, depth of field. Even though I was set to an aperture of f11, and I could have bumped up to f16 because I knew I was going to focus stack, I decided to keep it down around f11. But even an f16 wouldn't have pulled all of that into focus. So let's take a look at the final image where I was focused in on the trees in the background. So let's kick over there, let's look at the trees, and we can see there, the trees are more crisp, much more in focus, a little bit of haze. It was sort of a humid morning, so there's a little bit of haze in there. And then let's jump down to the rock. And here in this one, the rock is out of focus. So again, the depth of field is off and problematic with that, which is why we're focus stacking. Let's zoom back out so we can fit the screen. Let's go to my first image here. And what I am going to do is here, I sort of go through and do some basic edits. I do some of my basic exposure corrections and everything like that on my first image. Then I take those and apply it to the rest of the images I'm going to stack together. Now, I'm going to go through this really quickly and not explain a whole lot of stuff. If you want to see my video on my basic workflow in editing in Lightroom, I'll put a link in the description and up there. If you want to see that more in depth, I did a more in-depth on that. This one's just going to be quick. My goal here is to show you how to focus stack, not how to edit the image. So we're just going to zip through here just so it looks a little more pleasing and sort of fix up some of these highlights. So first thing I'm going to do is come in here to lens corrections, enable those, come down here to calibration. I like to a lot of times play with this blue saturation, pump it up. I like what it does to the colors in the whole image. Like that, we're going to go up to basic. What I'm really looking to correct in here is that highlight. And this water is just a little too bright, so we're going to bring the whites down on that as well, just to give that a little more. And we got a couple dark areas in these rocks, like in here and in here, so we're going to bring those shadows up a little bit. Bring that black point up just a little bit. And we're going to leave contrast alone here. I do want to dehaze, which is going to do a little bit of contrast, as we can see there. Like I said, it was a little humid that morning, so I'm going to put that in. Teeny bump on vibrance, just a little bit. We're going to go down to my tone curve. We're going to give it a medium contrast. which I do like. I find that pleasing. And we're going to bring those blacks up just a little bit right in there. I like that. We are going to come in here, saturation, choose my color picker, bring those greens down just a teeny bit. I think they went up just a little much. That's a little better. I like that. Color grading, just real quick, let's throw some warmth into my highlights. I like that. Shadows, let's go ahead and just throw a little bit of coolness in there. I like that. I'm not going to do a whole bunch with gradients. If I was working on this image more, I would probably play a little bit with some gradients up in the sky here and maybe a little bit in the foreground. But again, I really just want to show how to do the focus stacking and don't want to get lost in the editing on that. So from here, we're just going to mask in a little bit of the sharpening. Cool. I like that. Okay, so that's my basic edits. Like I said, if this was a portfolio image, I would be spending much more time making finer tweaks and using HSL panel a little more, some more use of gradients. But this gets me close to where I want to do for demonstration purposes. So I've got my first image edited the way I want. Go to develop settings, copy settings, check all, copy, and I'm going to select my other 4 images, develop settings, paste settings, and this will apply those settings to those other images, get them nice and clean, and we're all good. Now we're going to take these into Photoshop and do our work in there to blend this focus. So to do that, we're going to highlight all the images in Lightroom. We're going to right click on them, choose Edit In, and scroll all the way down to Open as Layers in Photoshop. Just go ahead and click that. Bringing this in Photoshop and opening as layers, what this will do is it brings each image into a single Photoshop file with each one on its own layer. And this is where we can use Photoshop to automatically blend these images together so we only get the sharpest parts. So if we look here in Photoshop, we see each one of my images. Here at the top, this is where I had to focus on this closest rock, and so on through each of these 5 files. Now what we want to do first is we want to auto align these guys. So we're going to click the top, hold shift, click the bottom, that'll select all of the layers. Then we're going to go to edit, auto align layers, and we're just going to take the defaults. Photoshop will do a good job at this. And what Photoshop is going to do, it's going to align these images. There's a couple of things that could throw your alignment off, even if you're on a super stable tripod. One of which is focus breathing, which is where you focus in here, then you focus in up here, and there'll be subtle shifts in that focal length as that camera adjusts to get that focus. And those little shifts can cause your image to be slightly misaligned. So you want to do this auto alignment so that's fixed. Especially important since we're going to be blending focus. We want everything lined up nice and tight. The other thing that can do it too is I was literally in the middle of the creek when this was shot. And while my tripod was pretty stable, you know, there's still some running water, little things like that happening. Little rocks can shift as I was moving, as I'm touching the camera to move the focus point. So this auto align step just helps clean all that up. And it's important to do first. Photoshop has finished that. We've got our layers in here. They're still selected. If they happen to come unselected, you would just do the same as before. Select the top layer, hold the shift key, select the bottom layer, and then we're getting set to move into our focus stack. Once you have them selected, jump back up to that edit menu, choose auto blend layers. It's going to pop up this dialog box. We want stack images. There's also panorama in here. If you're doing panoramas, we'll do that in a future video. But we want stack images for focus blending. And just make sure this top item is checked, seamless tones and colors. Make sure that's checked by default. And we're just going to say OK. So what happens here is Photoshop is looking at each one of those layers, determining what it thinks is the most in focus and sharpest, and then creating layer masks to decide what it's hiding and what it's bringing forth. And across those 5 images, you'll end up with one image where Photoshop has decided what is the sharpest of each one of those, giving you a very sharp and in focus image from front to back. It takes a little bit to do. There's a lot of work to it. Like I said, this was a 5 image one. Whenever you're doing focus stacking, 4, 5, 6 is probably where you're going to be at. But if in doubt, capture more images than you might need. You don't want to get home and find out you missed a sliver of focus and you've got something out of focus. That's not good. So, you know, capture more. And as you get more experience, you'll get a better idea of what works and what doesn't. I'm pretty confident on this 5 image capture. Might have been able to do it in 4, but I feel like 5 was the right choice. Okay. Photoshop finished up with that. What we've got down here is you can see all of the layer masks down here. And this is where, you know, black is concealing it, saying Photoshop is saying, I don't want that, it's not in focus. White is what's being revealed, and that's what's coming through the image. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn off all these layers real quick. We're going to start with the one I did that was closest to the camera, which is this one right here. So this is where my focus point was right here on the rock. And Photoshop decided that was nice and sharp, and it doesn't like the other stuff. These areas are masked out with the black, so they're not coming through. For my next focus, I moved over here to this area, so we're going to enable that layer, and there we go. We'll get the top of that rock. Photoshop thought that rock was nice and sharp. Had some other elements on that same plane of focus it liked, and it pulls that in. I moved back to that other set of rocks back here, which was those larger rocks at the beginning of the midground. Starts to pull more into focus. Now I went back in the creek bed back in here. Starts to pull more in focus. And finally, I went back to those trees, and Photoshop pulls the rest of it in. Now this is Photoshop automatically doing it. For the sake of this demo, this is what we're going to go with. But if you wanted to tweak and adjust, or if you know something's a little different, you can adjust these layers after the fact and, you know, mask out things by painting a black brush on it, or reveal things with a white brush. So you can make some tweaks, manual adjustments as you go. We're going to let Photoshop do its thing and stick with that. That's pretty much it. We've blended our images together. You could either flatten these images or, you know, stamp them up to the top. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to save it to Lightroom. So I'm just going to Command S. Save this image back to Lightroom. And what I'll get back in Lightroom is the flattened file with only the sharp bits in place. Takes a little bit to save. Once it's back in Lightroom, you can make some of those other adjustments if you want to change some things. Like I said, I wanted to do some of the heavy lifting because I had some bright highlights and I had some dark shadows, and I wanted to have the raw file to make those adjustments from. So that's why I did my initial set of edits there. But once we're back in Lightroom, like I said, I do like to vignette sometimes. So we'll probably take a look, maybe add a little vignette. And of course, just for this, we're going to show how the sharpness has changed from being sharp from the front of the image to the back of the image. Okay, we've got this back in Lightroom. Let's jump in there. Give it a 3-star just so I don't lose it. But this is the merged image. This is all 5 images merged. We did our work in Photoshop. We brought it back to Lightroom. So like I said, if I wanted to play more here with the basic settings, the exposure, or any kind of editing, I can do that. There's no problem with that. But what we're going to do is, like I said, my emphasis here is on the focus stacking, not the editing of the image. This is probably not a portfolio image anyways. This is more for demonstration purposes. So what I do want to do is, let's jump in here. This is the first spot I focused on, which is that big rock in the front. So nice and sharp and in focus. And in this same image, we're going to jump back to these trees. Nice, sharp, and in focus leaves. A little bit of haze, could have been a little bit of wind, but it's much, much more sharp than the previous ones. Take a look at the midground. My midground rock is nice, looking good. Jump back to these rocks back here, and they're sharp as well. So we were able to capture all of that. I think it did a pretty good job of pulling these all together. So that's how you focus stack from going out in the field, how you need to capture the images with moving your focus point from point to point to point, getting your base images that you're going to work with, getting back to the office, pulling those 5 images into Lightroom, do some basic edits, then pull them into Photoshop, do your auto align, do your auto blend so you're focused from front to back, and that's it. Now today we focus primarily on Photoshop for doing this, and I did that because a lot of people, especially beginner landscape photographers, you know, they head out, they get the photography package from Adobe, so you've got Lightroom, you've got Photoshop, and those are the tools you have easy access to. And Photoshop does a fine job of that focus stacking, you know, so I wanted to start with that. However, there are some third-party tools that can do an even better job, a more intelligent job of some of that focus stacking when you're looking to push that extra edge. And in a future video, we'll take a look at some of those third-party tools and maybe even do a comparison of the same set of images focus stacked in Photoshop versus a third-party tool. So I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please hit that like button. And if you want to see future landscape photography content from me in the future, including tips, tricks, mini gear reviews, behind the scenes, be sure to click that subscribe button so you don't miss any landscape photography content from me in the future. And thank you for watching.